Okay, good. I understand that you see the screen. It is my pleasure to do this talk on lunar seismology. Lunar seismology is very important, in fact, in planetary seismology for one reason, is that this was the start of planetary seismology, as I will tell you, and it is possibly the next step of planetary seismology, because so we have InSight on Mars, and much likely the next seismometer to operate on another body than Earth or Mars will be also on the Moon, even if, of course, we will have a new seismometer on ExoMars, on the ExoMars lander landing in a few years. So planetary seismology, I think that to understand really how much it is powerful to understand the interior structure of planet, so we have to remember what was done on the Earth, which was the first success story in seismology. Almost 1 century ago, more than 1 century ago, in fact, 130 years ago, we got the first detection of a waveform. Okay, so quake were detected before, including in China, of course, where you know that you had this instrument to detect the azimuth of quake, but it was not able to detect a waveform. But the first waveform was detected 130 years ago, and very rapidly all the theories were checked by the data. So therefore, very rapidly, you see by the end of the 19th century, we got data where we had the P wave, the S wave, the surface wave, which are really the most important wave in seismology. And very rapidly, the crust of the Earth was discovered in 1910. Then a little bit before, the core of the Earth was discovered by Oldham in 1906. And last but not least, the inner core of the Earth was discovered in 1936. So it took about 40 years to go from the first, maybe 50 years to go from the first detection of quake down to the inner core of the Earth. And today, as you know, we have a very dense network. We do see all the detail of the Earth. And we have more than 20,000 seismometers working on the Earth. So therefore, this is really the best way to get the interior structure of a planet. So the ongoing third success story is on Mars. Okay, I skipped the second one because it is the one on which we will work today. And that is illustrated by this example of one of our quake we detected, last in 2019 in July during the summer 2019, where you get this quake here, where you see the P wave here, you see the S wave, you see this P wave and S wave in a spectrogram. So you see that the P wave is higher frequency because there is less attenuation, and you see the S wave arriving here. And also we discover that we do see a cluster of activity near Cerberus Fossé. And as I told you rapidly, so at that time we have detected more than 500 quakes, and we will have our first Martian year of monitoring of Mars by January 1st. For some from some lucky coincidence, it will be on that January 1st, both the new year 2021 and a new year of Martian monitoring on Mars. So, and all the inversion of Mars internal structure is on its way. So therefore, it gave me now the possibility to start really the core of my talk, which is seismology on the Moon. So, in fact, seismology on the Moon was the start of planetary seismology, and this started as early as the 1960s, and it will be I believe, the next step of planetary seismology starting in 2025. So we know that Chang'e 7 will have a seismometer, and that seismometer is under a selection process in China. And we do have a proposal to put seismometer on almost all possibilities on both NASA side and ESA side. And I do believe that we will have a network of seismometer working on the moon much likely after 2025. So seismology on the moon started indeed very rapidly after Sputnik 1. And when you go to the literature, you will discover that some papers, some proposals were made 2 years after Sputnik 1, mostly by Frank Press at that time. And it started with 3 missions in 1962. And a seismometer was put in this big balsa wood ball. And the idea was to eject this ball just before the crash of the Ranger lander on the moon. Unfortunately, none of this mission was a success. It was a time where you see we had 3 missions launched the same year at a few months of interval. But again, none of the mission was able to work. But nevertheless, the seismometer was already there. After that, NASA decided to postpone it to the Apollo mission. And here you see one of the training of the Apollo 14 crew, training to deploy a geophysical station on the Earth, okay, which was supposed to be the one to be deployed on the moon. Here you have the central unit, and this object here is the seismometer, which will be deployed after almost systematically for all lunar mission. So therefore, you know very well the story. The story started by the success of Apollo 11 so it was started by the success of Apollo 11, and in fact, when you have a look on the Apollo 11 landing site, for example, with the LRO, so you will see this type of object, you know, on the surface of the moon, which is the base of the Apollo 11, and in fact, what was deployed by the astronaut was, of course, the flag, which was one of the goals of the mission. Then the laser ranging reflector you get here, and also the seismometer of Apollo 11 you see here. So therefore, this was really one of the first instruments to be deployed on the moon by the Apollo program. And after, with all the next mission, seismometers were deployed except for Apollo 17. So therefore, progressively, a network was built. First, of course, Apollo 11 is there. The seismometer was just powered by solar panel, and it stopped to work after about 1 month. But later, all the geophysical stations were operated by RTG, and they were able to work until the end of 77. So therefore, with first the deployment of Apollo 12, then Apollo 14, 15, 16, and in addition to this seismometer, the full set of geophysical stations were deployed. So 2 heat flow measurements were made, 2 magnetometers were deployed. On the top of that, we had 5 laser reflectors. At the end, all geophysics was there. So this show you a picture of this geophysical station, again with the seismometer here. The seismometer is shown by this picture here. It was a very nice and very powerful instrument at that time. It was an analog digital seismometer, so it was among the few digital instrument at that time. You know, most of the Earth seismologists were working with paper, but here we had really digital data. And also the installation of the seismometer was very well made by the astronaut. You see, the seismometer was covered by this blanket here in order to maintain all the ground at the same temperature. So very rapidly, it was okay. Moonquake were detected, and among the 7 years of operation of Apollo, more than 13,000 quakes have been detected. So most of these quakes are what we call the deep moonquakes. So the deep moonquakes are a quake occurring at depths between 800 and 1,000 kilometers with very small magnitude, so magnitude between -1 up to +3. And this was a very big surprise because you can imagine that at that depth, you know, the mountain is relatively hot, and therefore it was surprising to see quake activity, so brighter activity at that depth. So a few shallow moonquakes were detected, something like about 30 of them. They are located within the first 200 kilometers of the surface. Some of them might be very shallow, others are probably deeper. But you see, these are not very frequent because, again, 27 of these shallow moonquakes were detected. And on the top of that, about a little less than 1,000 impacts have been detected over the 7 years of operation of the InSight mission. So here you have the typical example of this data. And so these are the typical example for meteorite impact. A few of impact were made by the artificial part of the mission, so either the Saturn IV-B upper stage or the lunar ascent vehicles. This here show you the shallow event, you know, and this here show you the deep moonquake. So what is very important to keep in mind is that these data are the raw data. You know, they are shown here in digital units, so if you prefer in bit, but you need to understand that one digital unit is corresponding to half an angstrom of ground displacement. So in other words, in fact, when you see, for example, this signal, so between here to here, you have 1 angstrom of ground displacement, and between here to here, you have a second angstrom. So therefore, from the top of this figure to the bottom of this figure, you have 4 angstrom of ground displacement. So you have to really keep this in mind. 4 angstrom, I recall you that this is less, this is about 4 times the diameter of an hydrogen atom. So therefore, from here to here, you have only 4 atoms. You can just put 4 atoms of hydrogen. So therefore, these are very, very small ground displacement. And the reason of the capability for doing this type of very, very small detection on the moon is just because on the moon there is no atmosphere, there is no water, there is no ocean, and therefore the only reason for the ground to vibrate is because of quake. In contrary to Earth, where we always have ground vibration we call microseismic noise, which are related to the interaction of the oceanic activity of the atmosphere with the solid part of the Earth. So for those who are not seismologists in this audience, I just want to recall you that when we have a quake here, that quake is generating seismic wave, and we will have mostly 3 types of seismic wave. So we have what we call the body wave, and the body wave propagates in the body of the planet. We have 2 waves. The first one is a P wave. This is a compression wave. which is longitudinal. So therefore, the vibration is along the direction of propagation. And this wave has the fastest velocity, typically something like 8 kilometers per second in the mantle of the moon. Then we have the S wave, which is slower than the P wave with a velocity of 4 kilometers per second. And this wave is a transverse wave where the particle oscillate perpendicular to the direction of propagation. And it will arrive, of course, second. And this S wave is a shear wave. In other words, this shear wave is not able to propagate in liquid part of the planet. And this is why, for example, if you have the liquid core of the moon here, this S wave will not be able to propagate in the liquid core, and therefore it will bounce because it cannot propagate because of the lack of rigidity of any liquid. And last but not least, we do have surface wave, but surface wave at that time have not yet been detected neither on Mars or on the moon, most likely because of two reasons. The first one, that being related to the depths of the quake, and most of the quake are relatively deep. As I tell you, the shallow moonquake are within the first 200 kilometer depth. On Mars, we have detected a quake probably at 50 kilometer depth. And the other possibility is that the surface wave integrate too much with the surface where we do have a lot of scattering. So therefore, this network also was used in the 70s. But at the end of the 90s, the Japanese Space Agency made a big effort to reprocess all the lunar data into modern form. This was at that time related to the Lunar A penetrator mission. And the goal of this Lunar A penetrator mission, which was led by Professor Mitsutani from JAXA, was aiming to deploy a seismometer in this type of penetrator. And as you might know, the Lunar A mission was cancelled shortly, almost at the end of its development because of technical issue with the qualification of the penetrator. So therefore, Lunar A never fly, but it gave to all the Earth community, the Earth seismology community, and also the planetary one, a gift which has all the lunar data in very modern form. And this triggered a lot of reprocessing effort made by many of us, including myself and scientists of my lab. So last but not least, nothing was deployed on Apollo 17 in terms of seismology. And on Apollo 17, what was deployed was a gravimeter. And the aim of that gravimeter was to detect gravitational wave. But because of design issues, that gravimeter was not able to operate very well. And the data were lost because those in charge of the instrument, were looking for gravitational wave, were not able to do anything on that topic. And later, Taishi Kawamura, who is now assistant professor in IPGP, had a look on the data, and indeed the data were relatively bad, they were very noisy. But just because these data were now available in modern form, by doing very simple filters, it was possible to remove this noise and to see and to demonstrate that this gravimeter was also working as a seismometer. So in a few words, this is the network, in fact, we have on the moon. Not only 4 stations there, but also an additional one with the Apollo 17 gravimeter, even if at that time we still do not know exactly where are the 2/3 of the gravimeter data collected during the Apollo mission. So therefore, we do have all this data, but we still miss a lot of the data of the Apollo 17 gravimeter. So now if I want to continue the presentation of the lunar quake zoology, so again, these are the different type of quake I presented you. I recall you the size of the signal. So with this, you know, here you have the size of that time an atom of helium. And here you have the amount of quake detected per year on the Apollo 14 station. So the first point is that you see that this deep moon quake here are detected very, very frequently. So you have almost 1,000 of quake detected per year at Apollo 14 station. So which tell you that every day you have 3 deep moon quake detected on that station. Each of these quakes you see are very long. So we do have a very long duration of the signal. And even if the moon is not so big, but you know, when you take the typical velocity of this wave, which is about 3 kilometers per second, and when you notice that this propagation is lasting for 50 minutes, so if you just take 50 minutes, something like 3,000 seconds, and you multiply this by 5, by 3, you will get something like 10,000 kilometers. And 10,000 kilometers is, of course, much larger than the distance between one point of the moon and another one, which tell you that this wave, you know, they are bouncing a lot before reaching the station. So here you have the meteorite impact, you know, the natural one here, and you see that the flux which is detected by a seismometer is something like about 200 impact per year, which is really amazing. And work have been done in order to compare that flux to, for example, the flux detected by early warning satellite. And at the end, you know, it was found that we get a very good comparison between these flux. So therefore, doing seismology on the moon is also a way to constrain the flux of meteorite impact. And then here you see one cluster of this deep moon quake. This is the most active source of a deep moon quake, you know, called A1, which is corresponding to this quake. So you see that with something like 20 quake per year detected from the A1 cluster. And here at the bottom, you have the shallow moon quake. The shallow moon quake are those which are the most, okay, these are the quake we can really compare with our earthquake on the Earth. So these are the quake which might be related to some type of thermoelastic cooling, lithospheric thermoelastic cooling of the moon. But you see that we have much less of them, something like a few per year. So this is 2, 3, 4. So therefore, an average of 4 quakes detected per year. And again, with very small amplitude here. So this is the mean amplitude on that scale. So here you have 1 angstrom per second, and this is 1 nanometer per second, and this is 100 nanometer per second. So therefore, no, sorry, this is, okay, this is 10 minus 10, 0.1 nanometer, 1 nanometer, and 10 nanometer. In other words, you see there is almost no activity of the moon larger than about 10 nanometer, except a few impact per year. So the first important point when we compare the quake of, when we compare this waveform with those of the Earth is the duration of the signal. And it appears that the only way to understand this is to understand that the waves are propagating in a very highly fractured structure. And this is just related to all the history of impact on the moon. We also know that the surface, the upper crust of the moon is very dry. So therefore, there is no attenuation. And therefore, the wave will bounce a lot. And because they will bounce a lot in some way, you know, the propagation is not really a propagation process. It is more like a Brownian walk process. And at the end, it means that the waveform propagation is not really the equation which is matching the best the propagation on the moon. We have more something like a diffusion of seismic energy. And indeed, you know, when we even use a very simple diffusion theory, we can fit fairly well the envelope of the signal. And therefore, the moon is a very special case where the waves are propagating but interacting so much with the 3D structure that at the end we end up with a lot of diffusion and very few attenuation. What is really wonderful with the new InSight data is that now we are able to compare 3 types of planets in terms of seismology, and this is really very interesting, including from a physical point of view. So we do have on this figure a quake detected on the Earth. So this is a typical quake detected on the Earth when the waves are propagating in a crystalline massif, where the propagation is relatively nice, you see, and we have a nice P wave, S wave, and we have nice surface wave here. So this is, and here you have the time, you know, in seconds. So therefore, you see that the duration of the quake is only a few minutes. We have the same way when we have propagation in Earth's volcanic places. With again, you see a propagation of a wave along within a few minutes, you see. And here you have the diffusion. So if you prefer the typical scattering, and here you have the attenuation. So the Earth is on that zone. So this is a propagation on the moon where you see a very strong diffusion ending up with a very long duration of the signal. Because again, so this, you see the time here is expanded by 10 because of that duration. This is characterized by a very high diffusion, so in other words, a very low diffusivity, and with a very high quality coefficient, in other words, a very low attenuation. And what is interesting is that Mars, in fact, is between the two extreme cases. Propagation on Mars do give us access to the P wave, the S wave arrival, but we have a rather long coda, which is less than the duration of the moon, but nevertheless larger than the one of the Earth. So, and one of the reasons is that we have also a scattering on Mars because of the impact processes, and we have also attenuation on Mars as compared to the Earth, but probably much less because there is much less water in the crust than on Earth. So this shows you the interest of this type of comparative seismology, especially now that we have 3 telluric bodies on which we can do seismology. So if we go back to Mars, as you have seen, the first part of the signal are those related to the moonquake, the deep moonquake. So this deep moonquake appeared to have an activity which is depending on the Earth tide, and this is indeed seen by this oscillation in the number of quakes every month, and this is you know, the record in 72, 73, 74 on the Apollo 12, 14, 15, and 16. So you see this oscillation of number of quakes detected per week, and which is related to the distance to the moon you have here on the top. So therefore, this shows a very close relation between this deep moonquake activity and the tidal stresses generated by the Earth's tide on the moon. What is even more interesting is the fact that these quakes are very small, but they always come from the same fault. And when I say the same fault, it is really the same location within a few kilometers. And this is illustrated by these two examples of data. On the top, you have a quake which was recorded in 73. And here you have a quake which was recorded in 74. So here you see one of the challenges of processing this Apollo data. Why? Because the amplitude of the quake is very small. Again, keep in mind that one tick here is half an angstrom. So therefore, from here to there, I have 1 angstrom. And therefore, you see that we can play at the level of the bit of the data. So therefore, we detect this quake really with only 1 bit, 2 bits, 3 bits. So therefore, it is a very small signal. So nevertheless, when you compare this signal with this signal by doing the correlation of the two, you get a very nice and very significant correlation, which tells you that in fact this waveform and this waveform are probably the same, just hidden by the digit noise. And therefore, you can align the two waveforms, and this alignment is put there. And this is something you can do for many of these quakes, you know. And you see what is really incredible is that if I show you this figure, it will be very challenging for me to tell you that here I have a P wave and here I have a S wave. But if I do the correlation of all these waveforms together, I do get a positive correlation like this. And therefore, you see, after alignment, I can stack the signal. I take the first one, I add the second one, the third one, etc., etc. And in that stack process, you know, I built progressively the waveform of the quake with the P wave arriving here and the S wave arriving there. So therefore, this was really one of the big surprises. There is no other place in the solar system where at least we have data, you know, where we can do this type of process. And at the end, you know, it was possible to really understand this type of deep moonquake activity, and you retrieve, for example, stuff like this. So here you have the number of quakes per week. You see that when you have not so many quakes, so you have large amplitude of the quake. When you get more quake, you get less amplitude. That this is related to the distance between Earth and Moon. So therefore, the strength of the tide. And on the top of that, it was possible, and this was done by Nakamura. It is possible to demonstrate that the activity of this deep moonquake is at some specific time of the lunar cycle, mostly because at that time, you know, the stress are acting in the direction of the fault, which is something easy to understand, because when it is perpendicular to the direction of the fault, you will probably not be able to trigger this quake. So, more surprising is some recent analysis made by Taishi Kawamura in IPGP, where by looking on the corner frequency of the quake as a function of the moment or the magnitude, if you prefer, it was possible to demonstrate that you know, the stress glut, the stress drop associated to this quake depend on the magnitude. And when you go to the physics of the fault, you know, you end up to the conclusion that these faults are places which are probably very smooth. So therefore, we have very little rugosity on the fault, which is suggesting that these faults have been made smooth by millions of years of stress release. So therefore, we have also been able to learn something on the seismic triggering with this lunar data. So one of the issue of Apollo is that even if we had a network, sometime because of the scattering, we have not very precise position of the quake. And this, of course, is affecting the inversion of structure. And one interesting point was the fact that we had a lot of artificial impact. I show you one typical artificial impact, which was used by the community. This is the Saturn 4B upper stage, which is impacting at 2.5 kilometers per second on the surface of the moon, generating this big crater of almost 20 meters, and almost 30 meters, by the way. And indeed, this impact can be detected on all the seismometer. And here you have this impact detected at distances ranging from 100 kilometers to 1,200 kilometers. With here you see the typical amplitude. The typical amplitude are 10⁻⁶ meters per second, close from the impact, up to 10⁻⁷ meters per second when you are at 1,200 kilometers. And of course, the source, the location, the time was known. And with this information, so therefore, the travel time was directly useful for interior model determination. So also some stuff was detected. So this is, for example, to compare a shallow moonquake here with this impact. And what we have detected also is this type of overshoot of the seismic source, which is related to the fact that the shock wave propagate in high porosity material. This is something which, by the way, was also observed for in nuclear test made in highly porous material in the 60s. So therefore, it was also something interesting to do regarding the source properties. So at the end, you see we got a lot of this artificial impact here. And also we got a natural impact. So this is one of the largest natural impact, probably a meteorite with more than 10 tons, and which was detected very far away from the network at a distance of 3,500 kilometers. And again, you see this type of information gave us a lot on the interior structure of the moon. So the way this is made is classical in seismology. So this is an example with impact. So this is a collection of impact detected by the lunar network, detected at more than one station. You pick up the P wave, you pick up the S wave, and the P wave is in red, the S wave is in green. And when you get the P wave and the S wave travel time, arrival time, you can, by making the difference, get the relative propagation time of the S with respect to the P. You locate the quake, and then you can use this to invert the structure of the moon. So this inversion is illustrated here. So on this color, so you have all the rays which were lighting, illuminating the interior of the moon. The blue one are the deep moonquake, the red one are the impact, and the green one are the shallow moonquake. So you see that we get a very nice coverage of the first, say, 300, 400 kilometers. We have a big hole of resolution at about 500 kilometers, and then we retrieve a good resolution because of the deep moonquake between 800 kilometer depth and 1,000 kilometers. but we do not have so much stuff, explored by direct wave in the center of the moon. So when you do this, you can locate the quake, and you can also use the travel time to get the inversion of the interior structure of the moon, which was done in the 80s, first with Yoshio Nakamura, and also in the 2010 period. It was made both by my team in IPGP and Amir Khan at that time, in Denmark. And typically, you see, we have used this data set, something like 320 PNS arrival time of about 60 seismic source, and we were inversing both the position of the source and the model. So at the end, when you do this type of inversion, so you have two ways to proceed. Either you reduce the number of layers, or you accept many layers. So this is what was done by the two teams. So we made a more classical inversion with a reduced set of layers. Amir Khan made inversion with many layers. At the end, the resolution you lose in depth, in fact, enable you to reduce the error bar, while here the resolution you might win in depth, is not compensated, and therefore you have a large error bar on this direction. So there is no mystery, the number of data are the same. So therefore, either you choose to reduce the error bar of the average determination, or if you don't get this average, you have a large error bar. At the end, you see what was basically found is that we do constrain relatively in a comparable way the first 300 kilometers of the moon structure, but deeper than 300 kilometers, we start to be in a zone where it is more difficult to see something, except you see at larger depths when we retrieve, for example, here, seismic wave because of the deep moonquake. And here again, you see we have very similar structure. So therefore, this was the most activities. We had also a lot of interesting discussion related to the thickness of the moon. So you see a paper in the 70s were proposing an average thickness of 60 kilometers. We had reduced thickness, and mostly the difference between all this work are related to the fact that seismology tell us something on the travel time, and therefore we still have some unknown regarding the absolute velocity. And the difference in all these models were mostly related to the porosity on the upper layer. At the end, this is the typical summary of all this work made by the community. So therefore, you have here all the work compared in one figure, which gave you the typical velocity of the lunar interior. So you see that Apollo has made a big work by starting the field of research of lunar seismology. But at the end, if you want to compare this model here, you see, which is the green one, with all the other one, you get about the same thing. And what is interesting is that this Kirchhoff model is made with only a sample analysis, while the others are made by seismology. So it tells you that, in fact, the quality of the Apollo data at that time are not so good in order to be able to really understand all the detail of the lunar interior structure. So a big step was made by, sorry, I try to finish in about 10 minutes. a big step was made in 2000 by Lev Vinnik by using a technique which was developed on the Earth by the end of 80s, so after the first period of lunar seismic analysis. And this technique is called the receiver function analysis. So basically, the idea is that when you get a wave, you see, like this, in fact, this wave can generate a conversion. So for example, you have a P wave, okay, the P wave is arriving at the station, but if you get here a P wave which is converted into a S wave, okay, so you will get a second wave arriving after the first one. You have exactly the opposite here, and the opposite is that, for example, if you get a S wave converted into a P wave, so you also can get, this wave arriving that time before. So therefore, the idea is to compare two types of wave arriving in the signal. And this was made by Lev Vinnik. And at the end, it was possible to detect a conversion of a S wave to a P wave at the base of the crust, which was arriving about 8 seconds before the S wave, which is located there. And this was a very important new constraint providing us the differential travel time between the P wave and the S wave in the crust. But again, you see that differential travel time is mostly the thickness of the crust multiplied by the difference of slowness in terms of S wave and P wave. So therefore, we still have these uncertainties because we are not directly measuring the velocity, we just measure the travel time. So by processing this, we were able to find new type of model. And for example, what is interesting is that here we have one example of model with a crust at 30 kilometers and another model with a crust at 60 kilometers. But you see here the velocity are larger than here. And therefore, because the velocity are larger than here, if you go back to this equation, so you can match the same travel time. And indeed, it shows you that when you model this travel time, you see, so these are the data here. So these are the data when you model this data with a 30-kilometer crust, and these are the data when you model this data with a 60-kilometer crust. So you see that the differential travel time is the same, but what is not the same is the amplitude. So you see that for this 60-kilometer crust, you have a much larger amplitude here than if you have a 30-kilometer crust. And therefore, this is why at that time we believe that the crust is closer from 30 kilometers, mostly because of the low velocity. So this was made before the GRAIL mission. And what was interesting is that GRAIL was able to confirm this idea that we do have very high porosity on the upper crust, and that a high porosity is leading to low seismic velocities, and therefore, because of these low seismic velocities, is leading to a very thin crust. And it's turned out that the confirmation of this thin crust of the moon was finally made by GRAIL. And so therefore, GRAIL crustal estimate is closer from the crustal estimation we did in our IPGP group than those done either in the 80s or those proposed by Amir Khan in the 2000s. Okay, so after that, this was again done. So I will finish with the crust and with the perspective in order to give you time for questions. The core of the moon was completely unknown until, from a seismical point of view, it was completely unknown until 2010. And this is really very much surprising, because you have to keep in mind that the Apollo data were available since the 70s. And during 40 years, nobody was able to detect any core in this seismic data. And the reason is that everybody was working on the direct P wave. But you also know that starting at the end of 2000, first, the conductivity of the core was detected by Clementine. Then the libration of the moon, where the anomaly in the libration of the moon was detected by the lunar ranging, and Williams et al. At JPL made a proposal that we had a fluid core in order to explain this anomaly. And two groups, a group of led by Rafael Garcia and a group led by René Weber, made a reprocessing of the deep moonquake by using a reduced set of deep moonquake. They were using only 3 of this quake. And again, the idea was to process this data by looking on 2 waves. The first wave is a direct wave going from the quake to the surface, and the second one is the reflected wave, reflected by the liquid core. And in that processing, so therefore this is a processing where you need to stack a lot of this quake. You stack at the end the energy of all this quake, and this energy is shown on this figure with the radius of the core here. What is important to keep in mind is that the blue line is the noise. This line, the dashed line here, is the noise at 1 sigma, and the thin line here, the thin blue line, is the noise at 2 sigma. In other words, everything which is within this range and this range might be just noise at 1 sigma. Everything which is between here and there might be just noise at 2 sigma. And what was interesting is to see that at the 2 sigma level, we do see an excess of energy associated to a reflector with a radius between 300 and 400 kilometers. So therefore, this is really wonderful in the sense that in 2011, these 2 groups were able to use 40-year-old data to make a first-class discovery, that one being the existence of this liquid core of the moon. So therefore, this is more or less the structure of the moon we do have at this time. We have this silicate mantle. We believe that we might have a partial melt at the base of the mantle, and then we have for sure outer core, a fluid, and possibly a solid inner core. So this is a model proposed by René Weber, while the one proposed by Rafael Garcia is stopping at the fluid outer core. So I have to jump here, and I will finish by the future. So what will be the future scientific direction on the moon? I think the first very important point will be to play with what was described to you 1 hour ago by Jürgen Obers. The fact that now we have the possibility to detect flash associated to the impact. So this is very important, because every time we will get, an impact on the moon like this, and again, I do it again, it means that we can locate the impact, we get the timing of the impact, and if we have seismic station, both the timing and the location give us the way to do almost active seismology, and therefore to be able to measure very precisely the travel time of the seismic wave in the crust. In other words, we can do with this natural impact what was done with the artificial impact. So I am sure that the seismometer, which is under a selection process by the Chinese Space Agency for Chang'e 7, will do a great job by this flash monitoring and in addition to other stuff. So the second very important point is that, so this gives you what was done by Apollo. Typically, this red dot are the amplitude of the signal detected by Apollo. So this is 1 angstrom, this is 0.1 angstrom. This is the S wave, this is the P wave. And you see that the reflection of the core are below the resolution of Apollo. In other words, if you can do 10 times better than Apollo, you will be able to see all this reflector, all this wave reflected on the core. This was done only by STAC with the Apollo data, and if we have something 10 times better, it will give us access to this waveform. So therefore, you see also that we have the way with better seismometer to go on that direction. This might be done with the existing technology we have on Mars. And I show you one example. So if we were using on the moon a VBB seismometer, instead of having this type of signal for Apollo, so we will have this type of signal with the noise of the instrument being at that level instead of being at this level. So therefore, we will be able to do much better, of course, than Apollo. So this is my conclusion. I do believe that planetary seismology now is really back in planetary science. It took a lot of years after Viking and Apollo, but now we do have a seismometer working on Mars. We do have a seismometer in development for Titan in the Dragonfly mission. We do have a seismometer which will be selected by the Chinese Space Agency for Chang'e 7. And many teams are proposing a seismometer for either NASA, ESA, or any future opportunities to the moon. So it will be a very nice decade for planetary seismology, and I am sure lunar seismology after 2025. Thank you.